This is Lanoka and Yusefa again. We are now in our fourth episode with our beloved Dr. Willy Renandia. Pak Willy, thank you very much for making time to share with us again.
Thank you, Pak Willy.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, the pleasure is ours, Pak. So,
mine too.
Hari ini kita akan melanjutkan ngobrol masih seputar extensive reading, tapi akan lebih banyak membahas tentang bagaimana extensive reading berperan penting dalam pembelajaran bahasa, khususnya belajar bahasa Inggris.
Okay, so our focus today is more on ER and language learning, ya Bu Uke ya?
Yes.
Okay, so Pak Willy, could you tell us a little bit actually what is the process of language learning?
Okay, it's a very good question. It's a very important question. The starting point is our own experience in learning a language. But the next thing that is very important for us to understand is what research has been telling us about the process of language acquisition. I think we now know a lot more about the process of language acquisition. We don't know everything, but I think we know a lot more. And one thing that I've learned from my experience and also from my own understanding of the literature on language acquisition is this. A quote that I remember: the ability to use or to speak, to read, to write, to listen in a language, itu draws heavily or depends heavily on one type of knowledge, one type of language knowledge, and that type of language knowledge is called implicit language knowledge. Now, this implicit knowledge is very interesting. It is very complex, and you can't really develop this knowledge by conscious learning. Now, this knowledge will have to be acquired through implicit language learning processes. I think you have heard about the distinction between explicit and implicit knowledge. Let me explain some of the major differences between the two. Explicit knowledge is the kind of knowledge that you have in your head, the kind of language knowledge that you can talk about, the kind of language knowledge that you learn in the classroom from your teachers, the kind of knowledge that you learn in your grammar class when the teachers explain to you the present tense, for example, is used for the following purposes. The present tense is formed by using the following verb, structures or verb forms and so on and so forth. And when you are able to explain to other people that knowledge, that is known as explicit knowledge. Our explicit knowledge of the language is very superficial, actually. It's only a small part of what constitutes our comprehensive knowledge about the language. Now, and that is the kind of things that our students are learning on a daily basis in the classroom. They learn a lot of explicit knowledge. Now, the question then is, are they able to speak the language? Are they able to write in the language just by making use of that explicit knowledge? The answer is a little, not much. I think you will agree with me that when you hear many of our students speak the language, they sound, they may be using some English words, but their expressions, their sentences do not sound, there's something wrong with the way they express themselves in the language. Now I think that is simply because they draw on their explicit knowledge of the English language to speak English. Now, what I'm saying is that if you truly want to be able to express yourself in English in a way that is more or less idiomatic and natural, if you like. I mean, you may make mistakes here and there, but by and large, you'll be able to express yourselves, quite accurately, quite fluently, and also quite idiomatically. And that ability comes from your implicit knowledge. And this implicit knowledge is very complex, and this implicit knowledge can only be developed through what is called language input. Now, language input is interesting because the word input can mean different things to many people, especially to people who have very little, knowledge or experience about the theoretical discussion about language learning processes. Language input, essentially, in a normal language, is called linguistic nutrition, if you like. You need a lot of language nutrition in the form of through listening and reading. If you read regularly, if you listen to the language regularly, and you understand the language that you're listening and reading, after some time, you'll be able to develop this implicit knowledge of the grammar, of the way the vocabulary is used, just like that. You may not be able to explain how you acquire certain grammatical features in the English language, but you know you have it. You know you can use it. That is what I call implicit knowledge. So implicit knowledge becomes very, very important in language learning. And how is that related to extensive reading and extensive viewing or extensive listening? I think research is very clear that one of the best ways for students learning English in a place like Indonesia or Thailand, where the target language, English, is hardly used outside the classroom, then the best thing for these people to do is to acquire this implicit knowledge of the language through pleasure reading, through independent reading, through extensive reading, extensive listening, extensive viewing. Now, when they're able to understand what they hear, or what they read, and they enjoy what they're doing, I think they will be able to acquire, to learn a lot of this implicit knowledge over time, maybe 6 months, maybe 1 year. So that is the distinction between implicit and explicit knowledge of the language. Explicit knowledge is useful. Useful for what? It's useful in particular to get the students to pass the big examinations. Do you know why? Because in typical examinations in places like Indonesia and Thailand and China, what is tested is not implicit knowledge. Let me say that again. What is tested there is explicit knowledge.
Right.
And that is exactly what students learn in the classroom. They learn explicit knowledge, and when the teachers ask them to show them that they have learned this explicit knowledge through examinations, bam, they can do it. They're able to do well on the examination. They're able to score well on the examination. But when you ask them to actually speak or write or read in the language, they may be struggling.
Right.
So that is why I think we need to give a bit more emphasis on helping students to acquire implicit knowledge.
Wow, this is a very important information, I think, ya Bu Uke, ya.
Yes.
So a little bit panjang, a little bit complicated, but actually it's quite easy. If you know how to ride a bicycle, for example, you can ride a bicycle, right? You can ride a motorcycle, you can drive a car, you can play tennis, and so on and so forth. Your ability to play tennis is largely based on your implicit knowledge. Your ability to ride a bicycle depends on your implicit knowledge. Your ability to swim, also the same thing.
I think this answers to many of the questions that I also get, Pak Willy. Beberapa teman saya tuh sempat nanya, kenapa kalau siswa di Indonesia itu bisa nilainya bagus di atas kertas, tapi kalau untuk berbicara atau menulis itu masih kesulitan gitu. Lebih banyak yang bisa pasif, berbahasa secara pasif gitu, Pak. So now I know the answer.
Betul. Karena teorinya mengatakan begitu. When we speak fluently and well, itu yang kita pakai adalah implicit knowledge of the language, bukan explicit. Explicitnya buat apa dong kalau begitu? Explicit knowledge can be useful when you try to correct yourself. When you say something and then, oops, I think my subject-verb agreement is missing. I think you're using your explicit knowledge to monitor, to check your language.
Right, I see.
Gitu ceritanya.
Yeah, Pak Willy, so can we say that when we want to develop our implicit knowledge, it means that we are developing our sense of language, gitu Pak. Karena kan kadang-kadang kalau waktu di kelas gitu, mahasiswanya atau siswanya bisa menjawab, kalau disuruh menjelaskan kan nggak bisa ya Pak. And then what I usually do is to say, paling nggak insting berbahasanya udah keren tuh gitu Pak. Jadi ngomong kayak gitu nggak apa-apa gitu Pak.
Betul. Implicit knowledge itu bahasa technical. Bahasa sehari-hari itu mahasiswa sering mengatakan rasanya betul sih begitu. They have a feel for the language. I know it's correct, but I can't tell you why.
Yeah, why? Right.
Yes, but it's different for us. For us language teachers, I think we have a lot of implicit knowledge, and we also have a lot of explicit knowledge. Kita okay. For us, it's okay to have both. For us, it is important because very often we need to explain to our students certain grammatical structures. But our ability to use the language itself itu bukan karena explicit knowledge, tapi karena implicit knowledge. You have developed a feel, an intuition, if you like, of the language.
Yeah, the feel of language. Okay. Wah, seperti kuliah 3 SKS ya, Bu Oke ya. Berguna sekali nih, bermanfaat sekali nih. Okay.
Pak Willy, could you share us your own experience when you develop your implicit knowledge, Pak?
Yes, I remember very well. But back then, when I was a student, I did not know what it was called. Many years later, when I look back at my own experience, when I was studying to learn English, to become an English teacher back then at Yusuf's University. Back then it was called IKIP Sanata Dharma. Back then I didn't know. What happened was when I first, when I started my first year studies at the university, I felt completely lost because my starting point, my proficiency in English back then was very, very low. Both my explicit knowledge of the language and my implicit knowledge of the language was very, very small. I was not able to speak the language at all when I first started my studies at IKIP Sanata Dharma. Jadi, I would actually say that I was right there at the bottom. In my class, there were about 30 or 40, maybe 40 students in my class. And I would say that I was right there at the bottom. I attended all the lessons. I was very attentive. I was very hardworking. And very often I did not understand what the docent was talking about. The docents are very nice. They spoke English very fluently. And most of the time I didn't understand what was happening in the classroom. But then the English language program back then had a small graded readers library. And students were encouraged to read actually regularly. So I started reading some of the graded reading materials. There were not that many options. There were not that many choices. Many of the collections were, those classic novels, like Jane Eyre, for example, Little Women, Tales of Two Cities, and Hemingway's novels and all that. Simplified versions of the classic, if you like, of the literature. So I started reading, but I did not really enjoy what I read. So I didn't read very much. And then one day I went to the shop, to a bookshop in Malioboro. I think the bookshop is no longer open. And I happened to see some of the English novels on the shelf. So I picked up one. And I thought the cover was interesting. Sampul mukanya is very interesting. And I started reading one book. It was quite a struggle. It was not a graded reader. It was an unabridged novel, if you like. And I still remember the name of the novel. It's one of the series in the Perry Mason series. One of the titles in the Perry Mason series. And I started reading the book. I was like, wow. For the first time, I could tell myself that it was so interesting. And I could say that, hey, I understood what was happening in the story. And that was my starting point. Not only that, not only was I able to understand the story, but I was so immersed in the book. So I went back to the bookshop and bought another title. And I started reading it, and I was able to finish it in a day or two. Once I finished reading it, I went back to the bookshop and I bought another title. And by the time I finished my studies, waktu itu 3 tahun, 3 years of studies, I think I must have read about 40 or 50 books by the same author. Different titles, but the same author. Sekarang saya tahu namanya, ini namanya series books atau narrow, the kind of extensive reading called narrow reading, which I enjoyed very much back then. Now, let me get back to my earlier story. I started at the bottom of the class, betul-betul di bawah. But when I graduated, I came up at the top. In fact, I did so well that I was able to get to the top rank student in the whole class. So I was so happy with that. But back then I didn't know why I was so good. I did not know, and what I was only able to say was, well, I just did it, it just happened just like that. I was able to speak well, I was able to write well, but I did not know how how it happened. It just happened. And now I know it's because of the implicit knowledge that I was able to develop within 3 years. 3 tahun lamanya. I read. Now, many of my friends were also doing very well. They were highly motivated and they studied very hard. But I think I was able to speak better, number one. And number two, what is important is the progress that I made within 3 years from the bottom to the top. I think that is something that I wanted to share with you. Now, what is interesting is this. Apparently, my experience is not unique. Bukan satu-satunya, tidak. Many successful language learners, many successful speakers of the English language also have gone through the same experience. One example that I often give when I, give a workshop to people is this teenager from Korea. She was so good and her English was so flawless that she won almost every single English language competition that she took part in. The reason? She read even a lot more books than me. She said that she had read about 3,000 books or so. And that gave her a lot of opportunities to develop her implicit knowledge of the language. She is so good. The name of the girl is Sodam, S-O-D-A-M. And the story, yes, Sodam. And her story was captured in a paper that was written by a second language acquisition scholar from Korea. That's a long story. I'm sure that Yusufa also has the same experience and Uke also has the same experience.
Wow, ya. Berarti memang extensive reading itu bukan sesuatu hal yang mustahil ya Pak Willy, karena paling tidak dari cerita Pak Willy, there are already 2 people who benefit from extensive reading. One is Dr. Willy Renandia from NIE, Singapore, and the other one is a girl from Korea ya Pak Willy ya. Jadi ini sebenarnya kalau extensive reading itu diimplementasikan di sekolah, sebenarnya tidak hanya berguna untuk muridnya saja. Sebenarnya ketika extensive reading sudah diimplementasikan dan memang sudah istilahnya sudah mendarah daging untuk murid-muridnya, sebenarnya tugas guru lebih mudah ya Pak Willy ya?
Ya, betul sekali. Yes, I think extensive reading is good for both for the students and for the teachers. What I would like, I mean, a very interesting research project that I would like to see happening in places like Indonesia is for a teacher or for a school to implement, to organize an extensive reading program where the teachers and the students also do extensive reading. And at the end of the program, I would like to see, and I will surely be able to see that the students make, significant improvement in their English language proficiency, as well as the teachers. Yes, I think that will be really, really a very strong, is a very important piece of research with a very strong educational implications for students as well as for teachers.
Right. I think it's happening in Bu Uke's class. I mean, like, not only the students who are reading, but also Bu Lanoke is also reading, giving, like, examples, and also reading with the students, right, Bu Uke?
Yes. But then what I note from our discussion before, Pak Willy, that we have to, like, giving our role, giving our model is to also share them what we read, and then to share our excitement. I think that's what I haven't been done. So I read books too, but I don't share a lot to my students what I read. So I think that's what I need to start, sharing what I read to my students too.
Yeah, I think you need to let your students know that actually you are reading, and then that and also share what kind of book that you are reading. So I think that's important to Bu Uke.
Extremely important. Yes, extremely important. Now, can I just add one thing? Many teachers have expressed concerns about extensive reading, in the sense that, if we do extensive reading in the classroom, then what happens is that your students will be reading and the teachers will be reading. But that doesn't seem like an English language lesson.
Yeah.
And teachers don't feel comfortable not doing anything in the classroom.
Yeah.
So that can be, a problem. But it's a problem that is not difficult to solve, actually. In addition to doing that, in addition to spending a session where students and teachers are reading together, what we can do is to try to integrate extensive reading in our normal daily lessons. Let me give you an example. For example, if you teach speaking, if your focus is to help students to speak more in the language during your lesson, let's say that you have a topic that you want your students to talk about, to share their experiences and to share their ideas. Now, typically what teachers do is to just provide the topic. Okay, students, the topic today is, give me an example. Topic today is
bullying.
Bullying. Okay, the topic is bullying. Okay, let's spend some time brainstorming for bullying. What happens, what is bullying, and who has been bullied before. Let's brainstorm for the ideas, and then, okay, now time for you to work in group, to share your thoughts and expressions, and later you ask you to present. That is fine, but can you provide students with some extensive reading activities before even they start talking? The answer is yes, we can. In fact, we must do that. And that is one way to integrate extensive reading in your speaking lesson. What you do is you can do two things. Number one, you can provide a lot of reading, easy reading materials related to bullying. And ask students to read all these interesting articles about bullying, but make sure that the materials are easy to understand. Number 2, provide students with interesting video clips on bullying. Again, the language will have to be easy and accessible. So even before the students start talking, they need to see how the language is used in writing and also in speaking. Ini yang dimaksud dengan integrasi. Integrating extensive reading, extensive viewing in your speaking class. The same thing in your writing class. Writing in particular is very difficult. And you need to provide students with a lot of examples, a lot of models. Right. And that is when extensive reading and extensive viewing can be integrated in your writing class, in your speaking class. Begitu jadinya.
Oke, so jadi sebenarnya tidak ada alasan ketika misalnya guru ingin menerapkan extensive reading, tetapi lalu mereka mengatakan, waduh, tapi kapan ya menerapkannya atau bagaimana dan sebaiknya seperti apa? Karena sebenarnya extensive reading can be implemented, right, and integrated together with the other skills and also like integrated in the topics that we want to teach to the students, right?
Absolutely, yes. I think that is what is happening to you now, Yusefa. When you are working on your term paper, sebelum menulis apa itu assignment. So how many, pages and pages of, books, book chapters and articles you have to read first.
Right.
And that is your extensive reading, basically. It's very, very focused extensive reading, which you later use as a basis for you to write your term paper.
Yeah.
So, by the way, are you finished with your term paper?
I still have one more paper to go.
One more paper to go.
Ya, dan yang saya rasakan setelah seperti yang dikatakan Pak Willy tadi, saya merasa bahwa wawasan saya lebih luas, bahwa pilihan topik-topik untuk disertasi, rencana disertasi saya lebih luas lagi, gitu. Karena membaca buku-buku dan juga paper-paper yang harus saya baca sebelum saya menulis, gitu. Dan saya menemukan banyak sekali hal-hal baru dan hal-hal yang menarik untuk dieksplor lagi. So yeah. Right.
Yes. So reading, writing, reading, speaking, listening, speaking. I think they should be connected.
Yeah, they
should be connected more systematically. Yeah, I think teachers will need to change their approach to language teaching.
Yeah.
Without kembali lagi ke topik yang awal, without helping students develop their implicit knowledge of the language, I think the situation will not change. The situation that our students are not able to use the language for communication will not change a great deal unless we change the way we teach our students, helping students to develop the implicit knowledge of the language through reading, through listening, and through viewing.
Right. I do really agree with you, Pak Willy. Okay, wow. Ini sudah 3 SKS ini, luar biasa. I wish you are one of my teachers, professors. Okay, Pak Willy, thank you so much for today's session. Ini sangat berguna sekali untuk, terutama topik hari ini karena untuk language learning ya. Saya rasa ini akan sangat berguna untuk para pengajar dan juga pembelajar, bisa murid dan bisa mahasiswa juga. Baik. Terima kasih banyak Pak Willy. Thank you so much for your time. Nanti kita undang lagi kapan-kapan ya untuk sesi-sesi berikutnya. And for next week, we still have another
special guest
and also special guest. Topik sama guestnya kita rahasiakan juga, sama seperti jodohnya Bu Lanoke yang masih rahasia ya. Okay. So I think that's all for today.
I have just shared my screen.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, this will be very useful for people who want to know more about implicit language learning. I explained very briefly what the two terms mean, and I have also included a lot of resources, including a recent conversation about the topic of implicit language learning and explicit language learning by two of the most well-known figures in our field. Siapa namanya? Stephen Krashen and Chomsky. Yeah, they talk about implicit language learning as well. So this is a free website of mine, and it has a lot of resources, including a discussion on extensive reading, on vocabulary learning, and on many other things. I think I can share this with you later on.
Sure. Dan kita akan pastikan juga bahwa link untuk websitenya Pak Willy ini bisa tertulis nanti dan bisa diakses oleh para pendengar dan guru-guru semuanya. Sure. Okay. So
yes, thank you.
willymedia.com. Okay, don't forget. Okay, thank you so much, Pak Willy, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pak.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll see you again.
I'll see you again.
Yeah, next week with Yusefa and Lanoke. Okay, so
great.
Bye, Pak Willy.
Bye,
everyone. Bye.
Bye, Pak.
Bye.